All right, folks, thank you very much. A lot of people have registered for tonight's webinar, but we'll start up now. We will be sending out at the end of this event the recording and the slides for everyone who registered, whether they attended or not. But we thank you for joining with us on a beautiful evening. So tonight's webinar is called Truth to Power. Increasingly over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of misinformation and disinformation about clean energy and fossil fuels, and it's really dangerous. To define terms, misinformation is if you think you read something or heard something from a friend or whatever that's incorrect, and you spread that in some way to another person on Facebook or at a barbecue, and it's false information, but you didn't know that. That's what we call misinformation, and there's a lot of that. But usually, the misinformation is driven or spurred on or sparked by disinformation, and that is the deliberate spreading of falsehoods. And we have seen across the spectrum of energy issues that the disinformation is becoming incredibly cost effective. The fossil fuel industry and sometimes utilities and sometimes politicians, if you can believe that, will spread disinformation on purpose in the hopes that misinformation will then take it from there and it'll be multiplied in its effect. And we've kind of had it with that here at Green Energy Consumers Alliance, because we know that clean energy is better all around for society. It's affordable, it's healthy, it creates good jobs and choices for consumers. And that's the truth. We're going to tell the story tonight. We're going to try to point out the misinformation, disinformation, and talk to you about some of the truths, just so you can be better prepared when you're at a barbecue or you're posting something on Facebook or you see something on Facebook. But if you're here, you're probably 95% of you are probably on the same page as we are. But here we are. We're trying to empower you with some information. Next slide, please. So here we are, Green Energy Consumers Alliance. That's a great group of board and staff. We're a nonprofit organization. If you didn't know, we're based in Massachusetts and Rhode Island with offices in Boston and Providence. And we have a mission, and every word here is important to us, to empower consumers and communities to speed a just transition to a zero carbon world. Next slide, please. So here we are. I have brought to you a panel of the best and brightest in me, and we're going to have Anna Vanderspeck, our electric vehicle program director, Amanda Barker, our clean energy program coordinator, Carrie Catan is our Massachusetts policy advocate, and Tina Munter, our Rhode Island policy advocate. That seems to be cut off on my screen, but we're all here, and our email addresses are there. Depending upon what we say, you can contact any one of us. First name at greenenergyconsumers.org. Next slide. So the basics, sorry, but you're going to be muted throughout the webinar. We will answer questions at the end of the presentation. Use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask the questions, and we'll look at those at the end. We'll take them at the end. If you'd like to use closed captions, you can click CC at the bottom of your screen. And again, we'll send the slides and recording to you after the webinar. Next slide. So today's agenda. I've already explained the difference between disinformation and misinformation, but now we're going to get into specifics. Offshore wind, electric vehicles, energy cost in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. And then we've got a special action alert. I wonder what that is. We'll get into that at the end. And then we're going to open it up for questions. Now, I've got some of the smartest people in the world on energy issues, and we're going to take them one at a time. But then there's an opportunity for staff to buzz in if they want to add something to what one of their colleagues has said. So we'll kick it off with a discussion about offshore wind. Amanda, is there a lot of misinformation and disinformation about offshore wind?
There certainly is, which is what I will be talking to you all about tonight. So first, I want to just explain why offshore wind is so critical to New England. We often hear people say that they want renewable energy and they want to do something about climate change, but there are better ways to meet our energy needs than offshore wind. And I want to very clearly say that that is not true. Um, this graphic on the right is from a broader report on New England's total clean energy potential. And it found that offshore wind makes up over half of all the renewable energy available to harness across New England. And it really makes the most sense for our region of all of the clean energy sources. We have extremely high demand along our coasts. We have some of the strongest winds in the entire world right off of our coasts. And we also have shallow waters, which is ideal for turbine installation. So offshore wind is really, without question, the biggest lever that we can pull to decarbonize our electricity here in New England. Next slide. So now to get into some of the disinformation that we've been hearing about offshore wind. Currently, Rhode Island and Massachusetts are working to get their first large-scale offshore wind projects over the finish line. That's Vineyard Wind and Revolution Wind. And unfortunately, fossil fuel interests are working behind the scenes to push back. We have seen several so-called local offshore wind opposition groups pop up, often repeating talking points from the fossil fuel industry. These groups use emotional narratives about whales and fisheries while ignoring the impact of oil and gas extraction on marine life. So we want to encourage you to be really mindful about what you're hearing and where the information is coming from. So we've provided a list of helpful resources if you're interested in learning more on how to combat disinformation and misinformation. This first resource is Against the Wind. It's a report by the Brown Climate and Development Lab. And in it, there's a great map showing how some local anti-wind groups are actually connected to conservative think tanks that are fueled by the fossil fuel industry. The second resource, Real Offshore Wind, is a really helpful website where scientists and academics answer frequently asked questions about offshore wind. False Rumors in the Wind is a great article that addresses disinformation being spread by offshore wind opponents. What's Up with Offshore Wind webinar series is a great three-part webinar put on by the New England for Offshore Wind Coalition. And it really goes into depth on disinformation and how to best address disinformation. Then I also linked an article from the Providence Journal that explains that scientists have found absolutely no link between offshore wind and whale deaths. And then lastly, just today, there was an op-ed posted by the Dean of Brown University's School of Public Health, pointing out that local clean energy is crucial for improving public health. And in this op-ed, they talked about how in Massachusetts, more than 95% of air pollution comes from the burning of fossil fuels. And so a shift to 100% clean electricity, as well as electric vehicles, which my colleague Anna will talk to you all about in a second, that shift could really save Massachusetts $14.7 billion in health costs. It could prevent over 28,000 asthma attacks and avoid 1,350 premature deaths over a 30-year period. So this really is not just about combating climate change. It's about public health. It's about jobs. It's about improving the local economy. There are really so many benefits. The list goes on and on of all the benefits that offshore wind can bring to our region and to our states.
But Amanda, if there's no link between whale deaths and offshore wind, why are some people saying that there are links between them, do you think?
We are finding that that is a fossil fuel industry talking point that is intentionally being spread. That is a clear example of disinformation that local groups are picking up and using to try and combat offshore wind from being developed.
Okay, that's bad. Go ahead.
So I want to tell you what the science actually says. So again, there is no evidence linking offshore wind to whale deaths. Marine scientists have debunked that. I also want to say that organizations like the National Wildlife Federation, oceanographers at the University of Rhode Island, and lifelong marine scientists all support offshore wind because they recognize that climate change is the biggest threat to marine life. Studies have also shown that offshore wind can actually benefit marine life. Turbines can act as artificial reefs, which are shown in these images here, where they can actually create habitat for fish and other marine life. And studies have shown that there's actually a higher abundance of fish near wind farms compared to surrounding areas. And, I've heard from recreational fishermen in Rhode Island that they actually go right up to the Black Island wind farm and fish right off the side of the turbines because they know that fish have taken up habitat in that structure there, and they're more likely to catch fish right off the side of the turbine. So with that, I just really want to underscore that saying no to offshore wind is saying yes to more natural gas plants polluting the air we breathe. It's saying yes to more gas pipelines, and it's saying yes to the catastrophic impacts of climate change, which includes warming oceans and acidification that have a profound impact on marine life. So offshore wind is really the biggest lever that we can pull to mitigate climate change and to protect marine life in the process. So with that, I will pass it off to my colleague Anna to talk to you all about electric vehicle misinformation.
Thanks, Amanda. So I am coming with two sort of the top misconceptions that we run into when we are out hosting events and talking to people about electric vehicles at Earth Day fairs or community events all across the state. And the first one that we hear a lot is that electric vehicles are just as dirty as gas-powered cars, either because there's so much coal on our grid or because the battery manufacturing takes so much energy. And so the one graphic that I can use to dispel this is this resource from the Union of Concerned Scientists that looks at the life cycle emissions, so from cradle to grave, of gasoline cars versus electric cars and gasoline trucks versus electric trucks. So I'm just going to walk us through this graphic. So the first thing you'll notice is that each one of these bars has an orange slice, and that orange slice is the manufacturing of the vehicle. So these are the greenhouse gas emissions that are the result of the manufacturing of the vehicle. And you can see if you kind of squint that the manufacturing emissions of the vehicle are lower for electric vehicles compared to their gas counterparts. But electric vehicles have an additional slice, which is the blue slice, and that is the greenhouse gas emissions from the manufacturing of the battery. Manufacturing a battery is an energy-intensive process, so the greenhouse gas emissions up front from manufacturing a new gas car or a new new gas car or new gas truck are lower than those of a new electric car or electric truck. But the story obviously does not end there. UCS also looks at the operating emissions of driving those vehicles and what those greenhouse gas emissions look like. So you can see that for each electric vehicle on this graph, the gray bar of the vehicle operation is much smaller for the electric version than the gas. And if you take all of that together for an electric car, UCS found a 52% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions over the life of the vehicle, and for electric trucks, it was a 57% reduction. What I want to stress, though, here is that in New England, we've got a much cleaner grid than the national average, and this analysis was done using a national average. So if you were to do the same analysis with the emissions on the grid in Massachusetts or Rhode Island, that emission would be even starker, or the emissions reduction would be even starker. And if you are in one of the many communities across our two states that has a green municipal aggregation program and you opt up to 100% local renewable energy, that goes all the way down to 0 for the vehicle operation. So myth one is that EVs are really dirty. Truth is they're a lot cleaner than gas vehicles. This segues nicely to our next myth, which is that the grid can't handle electric vehicles. We hear this a lot. There's a lot of news about grid issues all across the country, and people see that and think, oh goodness, we're not prepared for that. But the truth is we can be. So first thing to know is that this transition to electric vehicles is gradual. We're not going to suddenly wake up tomorrow and have everybody drive an electric vehicle. And even when we do have everybody drive an electric vehicle, those electric vehicles don't all plug into the grid at once. In fact, electric vehicles load is considered flexible, which means it's easy to shift. If you need to use a microwave, you want to use that microwave when you need food. So that's not very flexible. You're going to use that microwave when you want to have dinner. But with an EV, it doesn't really matter to you when it charges as long as it's ready to go when you need it to be. And so that means that there's a lot of flexibility in when we actually charge those electric vehicles. And we can shift a lot of the demand from electric vehicles to low demand periods. So right now that means overnight when Amanda makes sure we have lots of offshore wind, that'll be extra excellent because electric vehicles can soak up a lot of the generation from offshore wind overnight when other demand is pretty low. And in some places in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, electric vehicles are already serving as batteries through the Connected Solutions programs from our utilities to help smooth out supply and demand. So basically, they're being called on, like other distributed energy resources, to ramp down charging at moments of peak demand. Electric utilities across both states and state agencies are preparing to meet the demand. They're forecasting out, okay, what is electric vehicle adoption going to look like in the coming years? What does that mean for the investments that we need to make in the grid? In Massachusetts, we've got a couple different entities working on that across state agencies. So we have an Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Coordinating Council. We've had a Grid Modernization Advisory Council and procedures or processes at the Department of Public Utilities and with the energy agency. So this is very top of mind in Massachusetts. In Rhode Island, we're sort of one step behind, but we're getting there. But Rhode Island has been pretty forward thinking and applying for federal funds to build out public charging infrastructure, knowing that there is this demand. But the good news is, again, this is a gradual transition. We've got time to prepare and the relevant entities are working on it. And then lastly, if I were allowed more time, I would have more to say on this, but electric vehicles exert a downward pressure on electricity rates, which means when you look at states all across the country and you look at how much revenue electric vehicle drivers have paid into the electric grid over time versus the costs that they have basically caused by requiring new service or electric vehicle charging stations, that new revenue really exceeds the costs. And this is true in California, where EV adoption is way ahead than Massachusetts and Rhode Island. But it's also true in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Synapse Energy Economics has put out a couple studies where they show you revenue costs, net revenue. And that is a good news story that is not told enough. A lot of people, when they hear electric vehicles in the grid, they think of only the costs, but the benefits far outweigh them even before we think about greenhouse gas emission reduction or public health. So truth on this point is that EVs can help stabilize the grid. We've got time to prepare, and there's a lot of work in motion. So with that, I will pass it right along. Oh,
and I have a question. Some countries have much greater EV adoption than Massachusetts and Rhode Island. As far as you know, Norway and the Netherlands and China or California, those jurisdictions that have a lot of EV adoption, is their grid broken as a result of all those EVs?
Not yet. No, I shouldn't say not yet. No, it's not. No, it's not. And the exciting thing that I could also talk about with electric vehicles looking forward is that electric vehicles are giant batteries on wheels, and there are cool pilot programs now of those vehicles discharging electricity back onto the grid in moments of peak demand that we're going to hopefully see more and more of. The Massachusetts Clean Energy Center has a really cool pilot program on that right now. But that is yet another way where EVs can actually serve as a tool to protect the grid moving forward, especially given all the extreme weather events and everything else that we're looking forward to in the next couple of years.
On that last couple of points about the grid, Amanda does, along with Loie Hayes, does webinars about heat pumps. Amanda, are you also hearing that some people worry that the heat pumps are gonna break the grid too? Have you heard that?
We certainly have heard that, and that is not a concern, at least in the immediate future, because right now we have a summer peaking grid where we have enough electricity to supply us when it's really hot and everyone has their ACs on. And so we're essentially just going to shift to a winter peaking grid. But if we have the electricity to be able to supply all of those ACs in the summer, we should have that same electricity to be able to supply heat pumps to heat people's homes in the wintertime.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear, we don't, as an organization, we don't want to discourage consumers from asking a question if they're wondering about uh, the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. If they sincerely don't know and they want to know, that we do want to encourage people to ask questions. What we're concerned about is when um, is the spread of misinformation and disinformation. So, okay, next slide. I think we're moving on to Carrie. Okay, this is relates to what we were just talking about. So go ahead.
Yes, it does. So my name's Carrie Katan. I do a lot of our Massachusetts building policy work. And so I've definitely heard a lot of misinformation when it comes to this, especially even coming from like there was one study that was put out by a group affiliated with MIT that was technically very sound, but they made a lot of very strange assumptions, and they came out with this result of, oh, it's way too expensive to build all electric unless you take away the odd assumptions they make, like they assumed that building all electric still involved hooking up a gas furnace for some reason, which added a few $1,000s in cost. But that's actually just a side note about disinformation in buildings. One really common thing that is heard is it is just too expensive. We cannot electrify all of the homes across the Commonwealth or in Rhode Island. We are going to be using fossil fuels forever. And the honest answer is it actually varies a lot in how much it costs to decarbonize a home. There will be homes where if you switch out their central AC with a heat pump, you have decarbonized that home and it's incredibly cheap. There will be homes that it requires a lot more work. Fortunately, the technologies, heat pump technologies are getting considerably better. And one area where I think the technology is getting really exciting is window mounted heat pumps that kind of just go in like an AC, but they're a bit beefier and they can handle heating your home in the summer, in the winter. Um, and I think that is really excited because there's always been some homes where they need a lot of really fundamental work to use regular heat pumps, but a window mounted unit, suddenly you don't have to care about the fact that the wall is old or it was built in like 1804 and all of the unique challenges that come from an old housing stock. You can just put something into the window like, many homes have been doing for decades. Another thing that's really worth noting is electric heat pumps can beat delivered fuels, so propane and oil, when it comes to price pretty consistently in New England now. And they're getting more competitive with gas costs, partly for reasons we're going to head into in a second. And yeah, as Amanda mentioned before, New England currently is a summer peaking electric grid. So we can add a lot more heat pumps for a while without necessarily overwhelming the grid. Now, it will be a challenge once we do become a winter peaking grid, just because compared to something like EVs, the amount of power it takes to heat homes across the region on those really cold days can be pretty considerable. But in this, we are kind of helped out by the fact that the utilities are already building infrastructure in preparation for that demand, in part because utilities in New England, at least the big investor-owned ones like Rhode Island Energy, National Grid, Eversource, they don't really make their money selling electricity. They really make their money building the infrastructure to get the electricity to your house, which in this case helps us because they're looking at increased electric loads in the future, and they are very excited to build all the infrastructure necessary to make sure that homes can be heated with electricity because it is within their best interests. Next slide. Now, there is also I mentioned utility incentives before, so we can also talk about what's happening on the gas side. There is a narrative going around that it is energy efficiency, so, partly Mass Save in Massachusetts, and a lack of pipelines that is making gas more expensive. And the reality of it is that's actually not what's happening. There's a few different things that have kind of contributed to the fact that natural gas heating is much more expensive than it used to be even fairly recently. One of those is about a decade ago, there was a large explosion in California, and that incentivized a national movement for more fixing of gas infrastructure. So in Massachusetts, we have the GSEP program. Rhode Island has its own version of that. And that basically allowed the gas utilities to spend much more money doing maintenance on their old pipelines than they used to. And that includes stuff like taking out the old steel cast iron pipes, which from a safety perspective is great. From a cost perspective, it is really bad because it is incredibly expensive to remove all of those pipes and replace them with newer pipes. The total costs in Massachusetts are going to be in the tens of billions of dollars if the GSEP, the Gas System Enhancement Program, actually goes on for as long as it's projected to take. And another factor that we're seeing on the gas side kind of happening at the same time is partly because we've had a series of warmer winters before this last one, and partly because more homes are being built all electric, and partly because of the energy efficiency programs that states around here have invested a lot of money in, is that we're actually seeing gas demand either flat or falling. And you'd think that would make gas cheaper, but the way most of the cost of the gas system is maintaining those old gas pipes, especially more now that we're spending more than we used to on maintaining those old gas pipes. And that cost needs to be borne by customers, regardless of how much gas is actually going through the system. So if you're selling 1 million units of gas and it costs you $1 million to do that, you can sell it for $1 per unit of gas. But suddenly, if you're selling 500,000 units of gas, you may save money by having to buy less gas if you're the utility, but all of your maintenance costs are still the same size. So maybe it then costs you, $1.25 per unit of gas in order to heat everyone's homes. And that's what we're seeing, especially in parts of Massachusetts, where these gas utilities are spending more money than they ever have before, but they're also getting less customers paying into the system. And then they also have other costs like utilities will subsidize new gas hookups, something that is currently before the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities and something we are arguing against. Because obviously, from an energy affordability point of view, it is quite bad that all of these gas utilities are spending a lot of money. At the same time, they're having less customers than ever, because that does mean that they're kind of locked into having to charge higher prices just to continue being financially operational. And we could enter a scenario where if it becomes cheaper for everyone to, double down on energy efficiency or switch to electric heat pumps or, do whatever it takes to use less gas because gas has just become so expensive, that kind of starts feeding into a doom loop where there's ever less customers, but there's still maintenance costs that need to be paid. So the gas utilities have to increase rates. And I mean, that is something that is a real problem that we could be facing. And that is something where if we just make another gas pipeline going down to Pennsylvania, it would not solve the fundamental problems that we face. In fact, Massachusetts, I know New England has more capacity to import gas than we actually have been over the last couple of winters, because we do have a big liquefied natural gas terminal where we can import gas from anywhere on the globe in actually only a couple miles from where I live in Everett. And we've barely been using that big piece of infrastructure, despite the fact that Massachusetts gas customers have been paying for it in their bills, because there just hasn't been enough demand to really need to use it. So building another pipeline would not actually bring down the cost of gas, despite what I think some fossil fuel interests are kind of trying to convince people of.
So, Carrie, basic bottom line here is that some people are thinking that gas is cheap and bills are high because of clean energy, is what the narrative that we've been hearing. And I guess you're trying to say that the prognosis or the future for gas is iffy, right? It looks like gas could go up in price over time, right?
Yeah, this is definitely all more, what I'm saying is more true for the distributing gas to like individuals' homes through their gas utilities. This doesn't necessarily impact natural gas power plants. Those are kind of two different, for lack of a better term, like economic systems where one can be doing really bad and the other one can be fine. They're not entirely connected, but at least on the building side, the sheer cost of maintaining all of the gas pipes to everyone's homes really requires a lot of people to be buying gas. And if that stops being true, gas just has to become more expensive.
Now, a lot of we've read and heard a lot of consumers think that the new pipelines would help reduce the cost. Can you just the gas utilities are they willing to build those pipelines with money from shareholders, or are they looking to ratepayers for that?
Yeah, that's kind of the one big issue with the idea of let's build another pipeline is, well, someone is going to have to pay for it. And if it's going in to meet the needs of gas utility customers, then it would be gas utility customers. So you could see your bill increase for this piece of infrastructure, which to be blunt, really isn't needed. New England is has historically been pretty gas constrained. Like we haven't been able to get as much gas um, in New England as we would like from like the big shale producing areas in Pennsylvania because there hasn't been that many pipelines. But we've also been fairly good at adapting to that. A lot of power plants switch from gas to oil, which means that we can kind of live with the gas capacity that we have. And as I said before, we have the ability to bring in massive amounts of natural gas from out of the country by sea through the Everett Marine Terminal. And we really haven't been doing that. So the idea that we need a new pipeline is a bit like saying we need a second car, even if we're just one person. It's not quite clear what it would even be used for.
All right. Now, Tina is our Rhode Island policy advocate. We've got Carrie in Massachusetts and Tina in Rhode Island. They do a great job talking to legislators and the executive branch, but you're hearing similar things in Rhode Island, I think. Tina, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, thank you, Larry. And I want to preface by saying my next two slides utilize examples that I've seen in Rhode Island, but many of the themes, similar to what Carrie had just touched on, are applicable to both states. So in this first slide, the image you see came from Rhode Island's Energy Efficiency Council and details some of the many benefits of energy efficiency and the benefits that we as ratepayers, if you have Rhode Island Energy as your utility, are paying for. One of the main points is that energy efficiency can lower utility costs by reducing the total amount of electricity that we need to purchase, because if you weatherize your home or you increase, the insulation in your home or the insulation in your attic, the units of fuel that you're using or the units of electricity that you're using to heat your home or cool your home can be used more efficiently, and you don't need to use as much or buy as much to heat your home or to cool your home. I also want to note this big takeaway in the middle that for about every $1 invested into energy efficiency, that results in $3 of benefits to Rhode Islanders. And related to that point, energy efficiency has benefits outside of just that monetary value or reduced greenhouse gas emissions, but energy efficiency also has big public health benefits. For example, if someone were to install a heat pump in their home, they would be using a highly efficient electric appliance. But because they're using an electric appliance and can get rid of their fossil fuel burning appliance, they're no longer combusting a fuel in their home, and their indoor air quality can be improved, which improves the health of the occupants of that dwelling. I also want to note that for a greater public health benefit, installing a heat pump, say my colleague Carrie installs a heat pump, even though she in her own home is no longer combusting fossil fuels, the outdoor air quality improves as well, and her neighbors can also experience improved air quality and those benefits of energy efficiency. So while one person may be installing an energy efficiency or an electrification measure, those benefits are not just felt by that one person, they're felt by many other people. And when that's expanded across states or across societies, that leads to many more sizable benefits. My next slide, I want to outline clean energy costs and what we've been seeing with clean energy costs on utility bills. So this slide has used data from Rhode Island Energy's proposed rate change from a docket that was in front of Rhode Island's Public Utilities Commission earlier this spring. And the rows highlighted in green are clean energy investments, and the rows highlighted in orange are the largest bill contributors on the average residential ratepayer bill. And this would be for a residential customer utilizing 500 kilowatt hours of electricity per month. So this past winter, we've seen a lot of concern about the high utility bills that ratepayers are facing. And there at times has been an emphasis or even a blame placed on clean energy spending or clean energy public policy measures as what's created that cost burden. But the truth is that by investing in energy efficiency and by investing in clean energy, we can drive down reliance on fossil fuels, particularly volatile fossil fuel prices. And if you look at the rows highlighted both in green and orange, you can see that those clean energy programs in green are quite a small overall percentage and overall dollar amount on a monthly utility bill, whereas those orange charges are both the largest dollar amount and the largest percentage contributor to utility bills. So when there's this emphasis placed on clean energy spending as the reason for why customer bills are so high, that is not, the entire story. We really need to look at the entire bill as, one piece that ratepayers are paying for and not pick out individual policies and how those are impacting people, especially as utility costs and electric costs vary per season from winter to summer for Rhode Island Energy last resort customers and can vary more frequently for ratepayers that utilize a community aggregation program or a third-party supplier.
Tina, could I stop you for 1 second? This is sort of a moment, a teachable moment here, which is the reason we were showing this. We calculated that the clean energy spending increased 2.6%, but we observed that a TV reporter in Rhode Island went on live on TV and was asking, I think, a legislator why clean energy spending was going up 43%. And so if you look at the top row in green, one of the programs went up 43%, but it's a small program, and the reporter ignored the other clean energy programs. So we did the math, and it wasn't, the total of them only increased by 2.6%. So that's an example. I don't think the reporter was trying to spread disinformation. But the caution we have for everybody tonight is even the media can make mistakes, believe it or not. And we if we see a mistake, we need to try to call them out on it. And so we wrote a blog about that. And we caution you. We don't want to say that it's fake news. It was not good reporting though. And if you're in Rhode Island and you hear at a barbecue that clean energy spending went up 43%, someone maybe saw that on TV and just thinks that it's gospel, and we know that it's not. So,
Larry, if I could add on to your point, I just want to highlight as well that while it's true that renewable energy growth charge increased by 43%, when you look at the dollar value of that charge, it only increased from $4.02 to about $5.75. And that renewable energy growth charge is a fixed charge on Rhode Island Energy last resort service electric bills, meaning that charge will not fluctuate with your monthly usage. So if you use more than 500 kilowatt hours or less, that dollar value will not go up or go down. And, while we don't want to, not show that utility costs and affordability is the problem, because we definitely see that affordability can be difficult in certain times. We want to highlight that clean energy spending is a prudent and good investment that helps Rhode Islanders and helps us meet our climate goals and can drive economic growth.
Correct. Yes, we'll come back to that. Thank you, Tina. You want to go to the next slide? Just want to point out that one of the groups that we work closely with is the Alliance for Climate Transition, and they have a web page dedicated to resources about misinformation. So if you want another look at what another organization is saying about this, they're doing the same thing we're trying to do tonight. So that's a resource that you might want to take a peek at. Next slide. We have a lot of really cool events as an organization in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We've got May 6th, Anna's doing electric vehicle charging at home. May 10th, 19th, and June 4th, we've got events in Rhode Island. Solar Tour, Wind Turbine Tour, our spring meeting on May 19th in Providence at a beautiful location. Anna again on June 11th, electric vehicle charging on the go. June 26th, more Anna, is a used EV right for you? Not just Anna, but also Caroline. And you can we keep adding events, so go to our webpage and you can learn about those. Next slide. Oh, we are a nonprofit organization and we do a great job. You just heard 4 outstanding speakers talk about misinformation, disinformation. They're experts on all these things, but I have to pay them. And so if you could donate, it's tax deductible, and I would appreciate it, and I think they would too. But more importantly, this helps achieve our mission, where we are trying to speed a just transition, and we do it through a combination of programs and advocacy. It's my job to ask. Next slide. Now, Anna, there's something big happening. Could you explain what's happening and how people can help?
Yes, this right here is an example of misinformation and disinformation in action. So Massachusetts and Rhode Island have both adopted a series of regulations out of California. So California writes regulations. Other states have the ability to adopt those regulations that have to do with vehicle efficiency and emissions. And there is a nationwide effort, mostly funded by automakers and the fossil fuel lobby, to undo those regulations. So you may have heard news on the federal level that there are several simultaneous attempts, both in Congress and in the courts, to basically undo the part of the Clean Air Act that allows states like California, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island to have these regulations in the first place. And so you might have heard about tomorrow, the House of Representatives federally will be voting on a Congressional Review Act of these waivers. The Supreme Court is hearing a case that has to do with this, but we're not talking about federal stuff today, we're talking about state stuff. So just as there's a campaign focused at the federal government, governors across the country are under a lot of pressure from those same actors to delay these regulations. So the key ones that we're talking about today are called Advanced Clean Cars 2. They require automakers to slowly ramp up the percentage of new vehicles that they sell in Massachusetts and Rhode Island as electric over time. So it's a gradual transition. There's lots of flexibilities built in to make it possible for automakers to comply, but governors, again, are under a lot of pressure to delay. So we are having a somewhat emergency webinar tomorrow. We'll be joined by the Natural Resources Defense Council, an organization called Green Latinos, and the Union of Concerned Scientists, and we'll talk about what the heck is ACC2, Why is it so critical for climate and public health? What is happening? How is it under attack at the federal and state level? And how do we take action? And so right now, the big call to action is in Massachusetts to call Governor Healy and ask her to stand strong in the face of all the pressure that states are under to delay. In Rhode Island right now, there's a little bit less pressure because Rhode Island isn't starting implementation this year anyway. Rhode Island's sort of 1 year behind, so there isn't a lot of pressure there yet. But in Massachusetts, there certainly is. So please join us on Thursday. We'll talk about all this, and then we'll actually just take 10 minutes at the end of the webinar for everybody to email and or call Governor Healy's office. So hope you can join us on Thursday.
Anna, we can send information about how they can contact the governor with the follow-up to this as well.
Yes, and I will also put it in the chat.
Very good. Thank you. All right, next slide, please, Tina. Questions, here we are. All right, so got some questions. We'll spread them around. Amanda, somebody asked about maintenance cost on wind and solar. Are comparing that to the maintenance of gas pipelines and fossil fuel facilities. Are wind and solar expensive to maintain?
So I would say, first of all, that operation and maintenance costs for wind and solar are factored into the fixed price that developers contract with the state. So offshore wind and solar are developed at a fixed price through what's called a power purchase agreement, which sets the rate that we're going to be paying for their energy over 20 to 30 years, or however long the contract is for. So it's already kind of shown when they bid that price. I'll also add that wind and solar systems are able to generate electricity without burning fuel. So, there's no need for procuring the fuel and the delivery infrastructure for the fuel. We don't have to figure out where we're going to store the fuel on site. We don't need the systems for combusting the fuel. So I think overall, offshore wind and solar don't have the same level of, operations and maintenance costs that fossil fuels do. Very good.
Anna, here's one for you. When we talk about the life cycle of a car, does that include of an electric car? Does that include the disposal of the electric battery?
The particular resource that we pointed to from the Union of Concerned Scientists, who are the science people who did that analysis, does not include disposal. However, there's really exciting developments on that front. So a lot of people are really concerned about the end of life of electric vehicle batteries. But the good news is that when a battery is no longer fit to be used in an electric vehicle, if the overall sort of capacity has decreased a certain amount in year 15 or whatever of the vehicle's life, it still has enough charge to be used as stationary storage. So there are examples already and have been for years of different types of entities using used electric vehicle batteries for either backup power or to basically serve as grid storage to balance out supply and demand, either for the grid or for particular sites that draw a lot of power and want to reduce their demand overall. So point one is you can reuse the batteries. Point two is you can recycle the batteries. So all of the batteries that we're talking about today or in the market right now are lithium-ion batteries, and they all have lots of metals and minerals in them that have a lot of value. So it's unlikely that at the end of a life of a vehicle or at the end of the battery's life, that those are just going to get chucked in a landfill somewhere because people can make money from recycling them. So there are several companies that have come into force in the last couple of years that are working with automakers to make that a more closed loop so that automakers can take recycled minerals from used batteries and build them into new batteries. One company in particular is called Redwood Materials, but there's lots more. The Inflation Reduction Act put a lot of support into this space, which is one of the many reasons why we are really concerned about any potential rollbacks at the federal level. But the industry as a whole is looking into recycling in a big way, which is exciting, but definitely something we'll need to keep an eye on for sure.
Very good. Question. A few of you are going to answer this one. I'll start with Amanda. Is there a discussion about promoting geothermal heat pumps? We've been talking mostly about air source heat pumps, but how about geothermal?
I think that geothermal is definitely going to be a key piece of the puzzle. It is a very efficient heating source, even more efficient than air source heat pumps, which are already very efficient. I think there are some pilots happening in Massachusetts, which maybe Carrie can say more about.
Yeah, so I guess it's kind of worth breaking geothermal into just two different categories. There is like the single household, single pump geothermal systems, which have been around for a while. Those are great. They are more expensive to build up front, but you do get savings on them because they are more efficient. They use less electricity. And importantly, when we're talking about stress to the electric grid, they are the most efficient compared to air source heat pumps when it is coldest out, which means they deliver savings right at the point where the value of electricity is highest, which makes them very useful from an energy standpoint. Um, there is some incentives for those, I think through Mass Save, and I think probably through the Rhode Island equivalent as well. I think one challenging thing is the utilities are less enthusiastic about these single air source heat pump, ground source heat pumps because they don't own them, and they also use less electricity, which means the utilities don't get to build as much infrastructure as they would like to because that's how they make money. So I think that's kind of one area holding it, like the high cost and the fact that it's not in the utilities' interest to promote them are two things holding them back. But it is a developed and really cool technology with some major companies involved in installing heat pumps across the area. As far as like there's also the newer network geothermal systems, which there are two sorry, I keep saying that. There's one pilot happening right now in Massachusetts that's currently built. And what it is, it's basically a lot of geothermal heat pumps all connected together that kind of share heat from one another. So if you have like an ice rink that needs to pump out a lot of coldness, you can do that into the system, and then it can be taken up by maybe a house that's trying to air condition itself. It's that can be even more efficient than single ground source heat pumps because buildings are kind of sharing the energy load. And the utilities are more interested in this concept because they are interested in the idea that they would build this and that it could, in theory, kind of be a system that replaces the gas system for them. And by that, I mean like a massive piece of infrastructure that people use to heat their homes that's both cost effective for the customer, so people want to connect to it, and is really big and expensive to build, which means the utilities would be allowed to charge a lot of money in order to like be paid back for the money that because they're always incentivized to spend more money, and this is something they would get to spend more money on. So they are really interested in this idea as sometimes sort of maybe a way that they could get away from gas when they are in a mood to acknowledge that's actually something they're going to have to do, which is not something they're consistent about.
And I'll just add on for some additional information in Rhode Island. We have colleagues at the advocacy organization Climate Jobs Rhode Island that are supporting a bill in the Rhode Island House. It's Bill 5576, the Thermal Energy Networks and Jobs Act, which would direct our public utility, Rhode Island Energy, to maximize investments in thermal energy networks or district geothermal when it's in the public interest. And Rhode Island also has a future of gas study or future of gas docket that's open at our Public Utilities Commission, exploring the future of the gas regulated distribution system in light of our Act on Climate. And when that final report comes out, perhaps in May, we're hoping that that will also explore geothermal and what Rhode Island can do to explore that as an option to help meet our climate goals.
Thank you. We're getting close to wrapping up. Lisa puts in the Q&A that reminder that we still have the Federal Inflation Reduction Act, which offers a lot of tax credits for clean energy. But for geothermal, it's a very generous tax credit. It's 30% on the entire cost of a ground source heat pump or geothermal. It's 30% for an air source heat pump, but only up to $2,000, and which is still pretty good. But for the ground source heat pump, if you do that, it makes it can be very competitive with fossil fuels. So now I get a question I'm going to ask everyone to answer. Question is, should we be more proactive in setting the narrative about the benefits of clean energy, or are we reacting to this anti-wind, anti-EV, anti-heat pump stuff? Or are we should we not be talking about disinformation and misinformation, or should we just be talking about benefits? I'll go in order. Anna.
I was not expecting to be first in order. I think this is a really tricky balance, and I think it's something I personally think about a lot. I've learned from our excellent marketing team that if you repeat a myth, even if you repeat it just for the purpose of showing that it is a myth, it solidifies in people's minds. So I try to both keep that in mind and really stress the benefits and just talk about what we know is true, but also acknowledge that some level of education about like what is misinformation versus what is disinformation, who are the forces behind the myths that we do here, is also motivating. So those are sort of two slightly opposing instincts, but I try to balance those two. So when we're out at electric vehicle events or talking to legislators, we'll talk about the positives. You'll see at the webinar on Thursday about advanced clean cars too. It's a webinar about why we need it and how excellent it is, and how it will help our economy and public health and our climate missions, all that. That's really the focus and the thrust of that webinar, even though maybe the timing of it is a response to a lot of the misconceptions and disinformation that are floating around, particularly right now. So I hope that answered the question.
It does. Carrie, should we be saying that clean energy is good, or should we be saying it's not bad?
So this actually goes back to the first campaign I was ever involved with in politics, which was a ballot initiative on transgender rights. And the thing we had to talk to people about at the doors, because I was obviously arguing for transgender rights, was bathrooms. Because that's what people cared about. That's what everyone was concerned about. And we knew that's what the opposition was going to scare people about closer to the election. So we talked about this issue. We talked about the facts around it. We educated folks. We even showed people like a kind of video that the opposition had used in an earlier campaign in Houston, and then had a conversation with voters about why the video and the fear-mongering didn't actually make any logical sense. And that was really effective. And, that ballot initiative, we defeated the ballot initiative. Confusingly, we were the Yes campaign, but we won in 2018, so it doesn't matter that was confusing. And I think that really goes to, you have to talk to people where you're at, even if you'd rather be talking about other things. It's important to acknowledge what your opposition is going to throw at you, because if you can respond effectively, you can beat it, even if they come up with very emotional, very impactful nonsense. As long as you take the time to point out that it is nonsense, you can win, which is something I very much believe in.
Very good. Amanda, are there benefits to wind turbines other than the fact that they don't kill whales?
There certainly are, yes. And I think both Anna and Carrie answered this question well in that, we definitely need to be telling the positive story of, in my case, offshore wind and, really keeping all of the benefits at the top of the news cycle. But with that being said, I think that the misinformation has been repeated so much, like that offshore wind supposedly kills whales, that if we don't respond to that, they're going to think that we don't have an answer. So I do agree that, we should largely keep it positive, but I think we also need to respond to some of the common myths that we're seeing, such as the whales one. And we need to clearly state that that is not true and call that out.
Yeah. Now, Tina, you are our interviewer on our podcast. Do you want to talk about the podcast before you break?
Yes, I would love to. So, Green Energy Consumers Alliance has a new podcast. It's called Consumers for Climate. And we recently launched at the end of this winter, but we've started with just giving overviews of that podcast with several of our fellow staff members here at Green Energy Consumers Alliance, focusing on some of our main topics. And in that, we both addressed commonly asked questions or things that we've heard that we'd like to go into more depth about. So, for example, with Anna, we did a Transportation 101 focusing on electric vehicles, and we went into questions about charging, where to charge, how to fund an electric vehicle, what's available for people that are interested in potentially purchasing or leasing an electric vehicle. And those are great short resources if folks are interested in any of our topics. My colleague Amanda did one on offshore wind. Carrie did one on Massachusetts policy. One of our other colleagues, Loie, did a great one on heat pumps and energy efficient fisheries. And you can look to that on our website as just another resource that will help you navigate clean energy technology or understand a little bit more questions that come up at family barbecues and help you understand what the truth is on some of these big topics.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank our guest for coming tonight, and we appreciate the comments. Rob loves the podcast. Which one was the best, Rob? Was it the one I did? I wonder. Maybe not. But I want to thank Anna, Carrie, Amanda, and Tina. They do a great job every day, but in particular for the last hour. So watch everybody for your email. We will send you the slides, the recording, and some other information as well. Have a good night.
Hi, everybody.
Good night, all.
So just to introduce myself, my name is Amanda, and I am the Clean Energy Program Coordinator here at Green Energy Consumers Alliance. And I am joined by my colleague, Loie Hayes, who I will let quickly introduce herself.
Yeah, I'm the Energy Efficiency Coordinator and our local heat pump expert, as it were.
So our agenda for today, we are going to start off with introductions, which we just did, and then we're going to get into planning ahead and how to know when it's time to replace your heating oil system. We're going to go into what are heat pumps, the costs and incentives for heat pumps, the various different design considerations for heat pumps, and then we will open it up for Q&A at the end. In case you're not familiar with Green Energy Consumers Alliance, we are an environmental nonprofit based in both Providence, Rhode Island, and Boston, Massachusetts. And our mission is to speed a just transition to a zero carbon world. And we have both programs and policies to help consumers do that. So we do a lot of educational content on heat pumps, solar, electric vehicles, things like that. And then we also have policy advocates that help advocate for climate policies in both states to really make sure that we're reducing our emissions and reaching our climate goals. And I do want to mention that this webinar is part of the Mass Save Community Education Grant. We were a recipient of that grant from Mass Save, and we're doing a lot of educational content and events to help spread the word about the Mass Save incentives. So you should learn a lot about those today. And I will pass it off to Loie.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us and for planning ahead about your next heating system replacement. Um, When you have your annual tune-up or your maintenance visit for your oil burner or your furnace, be sure to talk with the technician about what they found, what they learned about your system when they did the tune-up. Particularly, ask if they did a combustion efficiency rating or if they know the AFUE, that's again an efficiency rating for your equipment. And I've included here the metrics. Depending on which of those numbers they give you, you can see, does it meet the threshold for, oh, I should really think about replacing this because of the efficiency. You can also note the age of the equipment. The technician should be able to at least estimate that if you don't know it yourself, and definitely plan to replace when your system is 15 years old or older. Sometimes even before that for furnaces, depending on what the warranty was, what the quality of the system is. Be sure that they check, and they will, the safety of the oil tank and the peripherals. Is there any rust? Is there other signs of decay? Are the peripherals, the tubes, the filters, etc., getting clogged with gunk, etc.? Uh, Again, with the chimney, is there chimney soot? Are there draft problems? And you might know yourself whether there's problems with the ductwork or the radiator or baseboard. Any of these things, problems with any of these things, indicate that you would have to make a significant investment in maintaining your oil system or your gas system if you have gas. So those should be flags. If you have any of these problems, those should be flags. Oh, I should really think about replacing, and maybe not replacing with the same equipment, but with something better. And I've included a link here. When you get the slides, you'll be able to click through on these links. This is our tune-up advice handout that we have that will give you more details about this. So the other reason that a lot of people are considering switching to heat pumps is because of the environmental impacts, the global warming, climate change problem that we have. And heat pumps really are the most efficient solution to the greenhouse gas contribution from our heating systems. This is a Mass Clean Energy Center graph, and it shows the greenhouse gas emissions from various heating sources. You see oil is here, and it's virtually as dirty as electric baseboard. Electric baseboard is dirty primarily because it's not very efficient. Propane, natural gas also contributing greenhouse gases. And there are some emissions associated with these electric sources, air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps, but it's much less. And this is with the current electric grid, or the current electric grid as of 2021, I believe, was the latest data that they had. And as we move to a 100% clean grid, which we are mandated to by law now, you'll see there are zero emissions from the heat pumps. At that point, there's zero emissions from electric baseboard as well, but you would have to be using a whole lot more electricity to heat with electric baseboard. And of course, still emissions from the fossil fuels. So that's why so many of us are thinking about heat pumps and choosing heat pumps. And that's why the state is offering significant rebates, the state and the federal government, significant rebates for switching to heat pumps. So let's just do some basic fundamentals on heat pumps so we're all on the same page. A heat pump is essentially the same technology as in your air conditioner or refrigerator, except that it can run in reverse. So here's an illustration of an air source ductless mini split. Those words all mean basically the same thing. It's just a type of heat pump. And there's a head, inside your house, that just circulates air from the room past these refrigerant lines. And in winter, that refrigerant line coming into your house is hot. It's been heated up because heat has been extracted from the air and compressed. That refrigerant has been compressed so that it's super hot, and it comes in, and your room temperature air is blowing against that, and the heat is released into your room. And the reverse happens in the summer. This is then cool refrigerant. The air temperature is being blown against that cool refrigerant. Heat and moisture are being extracted and being funneled outside. So that's the basics of how a heat pump works. There's no air exchange between inside and outside. It's just the refrigerant line that comes inside and outside. What does it look like on the inside? Well, here are some ductless indoor units. The wall hung unit is the most common, least expensive. It circulates the air nicely because there's nothing blocking the airflow up here. And it's fine for heat to be up above because again, that it's a very gentle heat, it's a very gradual circulation, and it's a nice churn here. There are also floor-mounted units. These are particularly good on the first floor of buildings, and the refrigerant line to these can be brought in through the basement if that's accessible, so that you can actually have these on interior walls. The wall hung units have to be on exterior walls because of the condensate drain. It has to go more or less straight down to keep that water flowing, that moisture flowing out of the unit. But with a floor-mounted unit, you can have the condensate drain go down into the basement. And then there are ceiling units as well. These are a little more expensive because there's some carpentry that's involved with getting in there, and obviously you need to have space, usually above, to do that carpentry work. Occasionally, you can get a rectangular unit that comes in from below, where the carpentry work is done from below, but that's even more rare. What do the outdoor units look like? This is an air source unit. Basically, it's like a large suitcase, or in some cases, a very large suitcase, depending on the amount of heat that's being produced. There's a stand because you need to be up off the ground in the winter. You don't want snow and ice to build up and block that fan. You don't want to put it right underneath an overhang where icicles or something could crash down and crush the machinery. And then there's obviously an electrical connection to make the whole thing work. And there's the refrigerant line, which goes against the side of your house, and it's hidden by a little vinyl line hide that can be matched to the color of your house. Now, this is an illustration of a ground source or geothermal system where outside the home in the ground is buried a loop. It can be either a horizontal loop like this or a vertical loop, almost like a well. Then the refrigerant is brought into your heat pump in the basement, and the heat is then distributed via air or water. What does it cost? That's a big question. I've got some figures here taken from the Mass Save website. They have a great little comparison tool, heating cost comparison tool that you can use, and it will tell you that in this case a new oil boiler might be $9,000 to $11,000. Remember, there are no incentives except through the low income program. If you're qualified for fuel assistance, then there are still incentives, but otherwise there are no incentives. And a lot of people come to this decision when they need to make a tank replacement. The tank replacement itself can be $3,500, and then if you need to also replace your boiler or your furnace at that time, that's an additional cost, obviously. A new gas boiler, again, more or less the same range, $10,900 to $13,400. No incentives except for the low income program. And the ductless air source heat pump is $10,300 to $14,300. And yes, there are incentives that would lower this. You may need to upgrade your electrical service. An illustration here of a panel. You want a 200 amp service most likely. Again, there's some variation on that, and there are incentives for upgrading that electrical. Typically, the cost of the electrical upgrade would be 2,500 to 4,500 per unit. If you had a multifamily, it'd be more obviously. So that's just these are all very ballpark numbers. You need a technician to come to your house and actually give you quotes to figure out what your cost would be for your home. Here's a little screenshot from the Mass Save Heating Cost calculator. You put in your current system information. In this case, I put in oil. And it will show you the, this is the one for one. I have an oil tank. I'm going to put in another oiler boiler, and this is going to be the cost. It shows you what the available mass save incentive is. And your post incentive cost. So in this case, it will show you also many options for heat pumps. And what the net cost will be for that. So in this case of a ductless air source heat pump, with that cost range that I told you, there could be a $10,000 incentive, which would bring your net cost after incentives down to $600 to $4,300. Obviously a lot less than the cost of a new oil boiler. This also doesn't show the federal tax credit, which is up to $2,000. Note on the geothermal that federal tax credit is even greater. It's 30%, but there's no cap. So it could be a $10,000 tax credit, depending on the cost of the geothermal. And you can roll over what you don't use in year one, you can use in year two, etc. And I've included a link to this so that when you get the slides, you can click through and see it yourself. Now, the big question with heat pumps is the operating cost. Will this save me money in the winter when I'm paying the bills? And to answer this question, I'm sharing a DOER, Mass Department of Energy Resources slide graph. This is based on the actual heating costs for this last winter. And you can see what numbers they're using to estimate these various heating types. And your numbers will vary because this is an average. It's a statewide average of all utilities, all suppliers, etc. And the gray bar shows this number, this 33 cents per kilowatt versus this 343 per gallon number. And in using those numbers, you see that oil is virtually the same, but maybe slightly less than a heat pump. And that's what we found. This past winter, a lot of people with oil heat would actually be paying less with oil than they would with the electric, but it's very close. And these skinny bars that are darker color show the range of data that the state considered. So there's a greater range in the cost of electricity, and particularly if you have your own solar, if you live in a municipal light area with a lower rate, or if your town's municipal aggregation rate is lower, then lots of people this winter were saving considerably more than those who were heating with oil or even gas, and certainly propane or electric resistance. So it is very important to look at what these numbers are. And then, of course, what we're trying to do is project 10 years worth of those numbers into the future, and no one knows what those numbers will be. In general, we see more pressure, more regulatory pressure on the fossil fuels, and we're seeing more renewables come online at a relatively lower rate for electricity generation. So, but those numbers are anyone's projections. Now, one thing that's good that just happened this year is a seasonal heat pump rate, which is lower than the regular electric rate. This is already in place in Unitil territory. It is 6 cents less if you have a heat pump than if you don't have a heat pump for the whole 6 months of the winter season, and that applies to your whole electric bill. So 6 cents less, and calculating a heat pump user home is using 1,700 kilowatts per month, the savings for those people in utility territory we estimate to be $612 this past heating season for that 6 months. Now, National Grid and Eversource, I know most of us are Eversource customers today. National Grid and Eversource are working on creating a proposal for a heat pump discounted electric rate for those 6 winter months. They're not yet published, but we believe that they will roll out in time for this winter's heating season. So that's really great. How much they're going to be, we don't know exactly. You could perhaps use this 6 cents discount for estimating purposes if you're creating a spreadsheet for this purpose. Now, if you really want to geek out, there is a good article on the Energy Sage website, and I have a link to it here, that will help you think more about what would my operating costs be for a heat pump. So I recommend that. Now let's go into the incentives. Just to start with an overview, there are the federal incentives, tax credits, and Inflation Reduction Act rebates. There's the state and utility rebates, Mass Save, Clean Heat Rhode Island Energy, municipal light and power plants. There are some municipal programs, for instance, Boston has a Boston Homeworks Green Loan program. There are other loan programs such as the Mass Heat Loan program. This is interest-free loan. It's capped at $25,000, 3 to 7 year term. That term is determined by your income level, but there is no income cap. Everyone can get a Mass Save Heat loan if you qualify according to the bank's loan standards. There is also now a new program that I want to really recommend to people, the Mass Energy Saver Home Loan Program. And this is for low and moderate income households, but it's up to 135% of area median income. And in the Boston area, that's 191,000. So it's a pretty generous low and moderate income definition. It is for up to $10,000 and it's for 2% or less, and it's a 20-year term. So that is a great product if you need to make significant energy upgrades to your home. Diving into the federal tax credit, these are the 25C and 25D forms that you would be filling out. So the 25C is for things like heat pumps and heat pump water heaters, electrical upgrades, windows, doors, things of that type. And it's a max of $3,200 per year, but it's a mix and match of different things. For instance, there's a $2,000 cap on heat pumps and heat pump water heaters. That's your post-incentive cost, 30% of that post-incentive cost, up to $2,000. There are smaller credits for other things, like $600 for if you do an electrical upgrade for installing a heat pump or a heat pump water heater. There is no rollover, so if your 30% was greater than 2,000, you can't take that remainder the next year. But you can do a new thing each year and claim a new energy saving tax credit every year. So you can do heat pumps year 1, you can do heat pump water heater year 2, you can do new windows year 3, etc. Now there is also the 25D, which covers your geothermal heat pump installations, batteries, solar, things like that. And that is a 30% post-incentive tax credit, but there's no cap. So if your 30% was $3,000, you could take $3,000, or $10,000, you could take $10,000, and it can roll over. So if you don't use all of that tax credit in the first year, you can apply the remainder to the next year, etc. And there are a couple links here to help you with that. Federal rebates. So these are the IRA rebates. They are federally funded, but they're administered by the states. And in Massachusetts, we think that they're going to be announced in June or July of this year. There are 2 types. One has the acronym here, and that is based on measures, and it is up to 150% of area median income. This is going to be administered through the municipal light plants and through DOER's affordable housing program. So you have to be in one of those groups in order to benefit from this. The Home Efficiency Rebate Program, or HER, is based on projected energy savings, and this will be administered through the CAP agencies. Again, if you qualify for fuel assistance, this is something that could potentially benefit you. Or if you qualify for Mass Save's Moderate Income Program, and there are income worksheets that you can fill out on the Mass Save website to figure out if you're part of that moderate income cohort that they're looking for. It's up to 80% of area median income. And there are a couple links here for that information. And of course, we don't know exactly what the federal government is going to do about releasing the funds for these. So that's the big elephant in the room. There are similar programs in Rhode Island as well that we can tell you more about if you want to follow up on those. And we have links that you can follow to get more information. Rhode Island, there are some things that have been paused and then restarted. So do follow up with us if you're looking to take advantage of these in Rhode Island. In Massachusetts, of course, the incentives vary depending on the household income and the zip code. So here's an example of a two-person household in Cambridge with 3 different income levels. So the income, excuse me, for this two-person household is less than this 59,000 number. ABCD, the Fuel Assistance Agency, would completely cover the cost of a heat pump installation. If you're moderate income, and in Cambridge, for a two-person household, this is defined as roughly 60,000 to 104,000, you would qualify for the enhanced incentive of 16,000 per apartment or home. And I know one Mass Energy oil heat member who did qualify this for a 2-family house. So they got 16,000 per home off the cost of their heat pump installation, and it really was the deciding factor for them. There's a pilot program in Plymouth and Brockton and Springfield that also covers 100% of the cost for moderate income households. And then the market rate for this 2-family household in Cambridge is defined as 104,000 plus. And that is up to $10,000 per apartment or home. It's measured by heating capacity, tons of heating capacity, and it's $3,000 per ton. The average home might need 3,000 or 4,000 tons for the whole home. So as of this year, there is a new mass enhanced incentive for equity communities. And this is communities, this is the list of communities. It's where more than 50% of a building is occupied by tenants. 100% of the cost of weatherization is borne by the Mass Save program. There are enhanced electrification offers, turnkey services, expanded outreach, and language support. So this is a great advancement for people who've traditionally been left out of the Mass Save program. We're pleased to see this. Now, this is the market rate incentive for people who don't qualify for the low income program or the moderate income program. And you see here, this is broken into tiers. This is starting with just a basic, if you were putting in a heat pump that was primarily designed for cooling, there would be a small incentive. And then if you're doing partial home, you'd get 1,200 per ton. And then if you go to a full home system, you would get $3,000 per ton up to 10,000. And here you see that enhanced for moderate income is 16,000. And you notice that each year this declines slightly. The Mass Save program works in 3-year tranches, so we're starting the new 3-year plan, and the incentive drops $1,000. The cap on that incentive drops $1,000 per year for the next 3 years, although for the moderate income it stays steady. Then there is a geothermal or ground source heat pump incentive, and also even a partial ground source incentive. Now, I do want to mention water heaters because if you have an oil system, oftentimes your hot water is connected to your oil system. And if you replace the oil heat, you also need to replace your water heating capacity. And there are heat pump water heaters. A lot of these are tanked, a tank, and it might be called a hybrid, or it might be, 100% heat pump. Hybrid just means that there's an electric element in here that can boost it if the temperature is very cold. It uses the electric element to boost it. There's a $750 instant rebate through your contractor, or if you're purchasing from Lowe's or Home Depot, that's a $600 rebate in Rhode Island. These are more efficient than any other tank equipment, 2 to 3 times more efficient in terms of how it uses the energy. It does need adequate space for air exchange, usually a full basement, not a garage, not a utility closet. It does need usually a 240 volt circuit. It's a dedicated circuit. There are plug-in units, but they're not really being installed in the Northeast yet. They're designed for warmer, more mild temperatures. It does need a condensate drain because, again, as it pulls heat out of the air, there is moisture that condenses in that colder air. And it does make the space both cooler and drier. So if you have a heated basement or a basement where you have a workshop that's just heated by excess heat from your boiler or your furnace, that could be a problem. If you are concerned about that space being cooler, there are split system heat pump water heaters, and this is where the tank is separate from the heat pump. You can see this black area here is the heat pump, and this is your tank. In the split systems, it's a tank, and then the condenser is outside of your basement. So heat is being extracted from the outside, not from your basement. And the condensate is not an issue because it's outdoors. Now, there is a larger incentive for the split system heat pump water heaters through Mass Save because it tends to be a little more expensive, the equipment. But there are also solar assisted split system heat pump water heaters. That's a mouthful. But there is a 30% federal tax credit with no cap. So again, you could take a larger tax credit. Efficiency Maine has a great website for calculating the comparison of different water heating equipment. So I recommend that as well. The Energy Star has good equipment listings as well, and you can sort that by split system, for instance. So let's talk about design options. Here you see a condenser that is shielded by this overhang, so that's really nice. Keeps it from getting, piled up with snow, etc. So think about your home and think, does it have ductwork or not? Grates in the floor for hot air to come up, and return ducts for makeup air for the furnace. If you have a furnace instead of a boiler, that hot air ductwork it could easily be repurposed for a heat pump system. You just need to make sure that there's not going to be condensate in the ductwork, and if the ductwork is in good condition, etc. You do need an HVAC technician to really take a look at that and make sure. If you have central air conditioning, it's also possible that central air conditioning ductwork could be used for the heat pump. It's a little trickier because hot air takes more space than cold air does. So your ductwork may be too small for heating. But and again, there's the question of the condensate. But it's really great if you can replace, obviously 2 pieces of equipment, your central AC and your furnace, with just one, the heat pump. Your equipment costs are going to be less, as well as your maintenance costs. Now, if your home does not have ductwork, you have a boiler. You have radiators, or you have hot water baseboard or steam baseboard. Well, steam radiators or hot water radiators. At present, generally, most heat pumps do not produce hot enough water to easily replace boilers. Now, if you've added a lot of insulation to your home, you may be able to find equipment that's going to be adequate. There are more and more hydronic options becoming available every year, so don't give up on that idea. But for most people with what we call hydronic heat, hot water or steam, you're going to be looking at a ductless or mini ducted heat pump system if you want to switch to heat pumps. Again, you can have a single head serving a large open area. You can have single zones or multi-zones. A mini ducted head could sit in the attic above, say, 3 adjacent small rooms on the 3rd floor and serve each of those rooms. And you always want to insulate first, because that's going to make a difference in terms of the cost of the equipment, the size of the equipment that you're buying. Sizing the equipment is one of the places where we found consumers have the most trouble working with contractors and getting a good, reputable quote from a contractor. So I'm going to show you a few slides about sizing the equipment. Now, in this illustration, we have a simple 2-bedroom home, and we're positing that it needs 24,000 BTUs per hour to keep this house comfortable in the winter. And in this illustration, we're using basically the wood stove analogy, where you have your heat pump head in this large common area, and it's keeping all of this common area nice and toasty in winter, and these 2 back bedrooms are cooler. And this may be just fine for the hardy New Englanders among us, but it may be that you want to do this and have a partial displacement of your fossil heat, meaning you're keeping your heating system, you're setting the thermostat back here, and you're using that to keep these bedrooms from getting too cold in the winter. Obviously, in summer, these bedrooms would be warmer than this area, which would be nice and cool. And you might want to put a ceiling fan in these 2 rooms, and that might be, the perfect answer. What we want to warn you against is too many heads in too small a space. Now, in this case, a contractor has said, I'm going to put a $9,000 BTU head in 4 spaces, 1 in each bedroom and 2 in this open area. It's going to be more BTUs than you need. It's going to produce 36,000 BTUs, 30% more than what you need. And this too much equipment is going to result in both energy issues, too much energy being used, and performance issues. It's not giving you the warmth and the cool that you want. Heat pump systems are designed to run continuously at a steady state, and that's when they're most efficient. If they're cycling on and off, they're going to be inefficient. And with these small bedrooms and 9,000 BTUs, it's going to get hot, and then it's going to need to shut down to allow the heat to dissipate. And that on-off cycling, and ditto in the summer, is going to get cold and it's going to shut off. And that's particularly problematic in terms of comfort, because the dehumidification takes longer than the cooling. 2 separate functions in the same machine, but the dehumidification takes longer. And so the cooling is going to happen, it's going to shut off, and the dehumidification is not going to happen. It's not going to be successful. So do not buy more BTUs than you understand that you need. And the way you understand that you need it is by asking the contractor to estimate each room how many BTUs are needed to keep that warm in the winter. This could be the perfect solution for you, a mini ducted unit. We've got an air handler that sits in the attic above these bedrooms. It could even sit in the basement and have two small runs coming up to floor registers. And that way you've got 12,000 BTUs divided between the two of them, so they're each only getting 6,000, and they're perfectly comfortable summer and winter, and you've got 12,000 in the open area, and that's getting you perfectly condensed comfortable as well. These could be connected to one condenser or two. If you connect them to two condensers, it tends to be even more efficient than just one. But obviously there's some greater expense in the equipment. The condenser can be up to 150 feet from the unit, so you've got some pretty good latitude. And how to proceed. First, if you haven't had a home energy assessment from MassSave in the last 2 years, you want to request that when you're thinking about getting quotes for systems. You need this to qualify for incentives. They need to know what equipment you would be replacing in order to calculate what your savings would be, and thus why it's a good thing for MassSave to subsidize. Excuse me. You definitely want to do any additional insulation and air sealing that they recommend. You also want to research the incentives and loan programs that apply to you. I've got links to two great incentive finders for each state and the various loan programs. And then we do recommend asking Energy Sage for a solar assessment if you have any, sunny roof space that you think might work for solar, because solar really brings down the cost of your electricity. And if you could install solar, then that makes your operating cost for the heat pump much lower. And then you can actually estimate what the whole 10 years would be, because it would be based on that upfront cost with the solar, not on a per year changing electric rate. You can also get an assessment for you can get a quote for community solar. Even if you don't have a sunny roof, community solar will often give you a discount on your kilowatt charge. We do encourage you to get multiple perspectives. Do not talk to just one contractor. You want to talk with multiple contractors, and luckily in both Rhode Island and Massachusetts, you can get no cost virtual independent consultations with the MassSave program. Oftentimes with municipal power companies, they provide those as well. Energy Sage provides that as well. Energy Sage can also provide you with quotes and independent advice on those quotes, and Clean Heat Rhode Island as well. You can research installers via the MassSave site, and also the Energy Saver Home Loan Program that I mentioned has a contractors list. You can cross-reference these and find the contractors with the highest level of experience. Once you've started to narrow down your contractor list, look at their websites, see what they say about heat pumps, if they say what type of manufacturers, what type of equipment they supply, then go to the manufacturer's website and see what the rating is for that, for those contractors. You can get a lot of information before you even talk with a contractor. Be sure to get 3 quotes. There are many ways to skin a cat with heat pumps, many different design options. You want to be sure you've gotten a diversity of perspectives on your heating needs. And of course, start at our website if you want more basic information and lots of links to information and FAQs and things like that. So 3 questions that we suggest that you ask installers explicitly is your company approved for my state or municipal heat pump rebate program? And note that in the near future, we expect that MassSave will create a higher tier of qualifications for their heat pump installer network. So you'll be able to choose, oh, I really want to go with the top of the line installers, the people who have the most experience. Is the equipment that you're recommending eligible for the cold climate heat pump state and municipal rebates? And you can also, using that IRS link that I shared on the earlier slides that you'll see, you can find, is it eligible for the federal tax credit as well? So you want to make sure and not assume, that the equipment will be eligible for a rebate, and then find out when you submit the application that, oh, you missed it by 1%. It had to be 93%, and yours was only 92%. I'm making up numbers, but you want to make sure of that. And ask them if they formally calculate your heat load before you sign a contract to purchase specific pieces of equipment. The heat load is that calculation that I mentioned where they're actually measuring how much heat is necessary to keep a particular space comfortable on a winter's night. And that's a measure of BTUs. And ideally, you'll find a contractor who will calculate your heat load by room and then correlate that to the size of the equipment that they're selling. Now, a lot of contractors will estimate that heat load, and you might feel comfortable about that, but I would talk with them. What is the basis of your estimate, and why do you think it's that and not 500 more BTUs or 500 less BTUs, et cetera, or 1,000? Ask them for their reasoning and compare the 3 different contractors. What heat loads did they estimate? By the way, the Energy Saver Home Loan Program has a fabulous element, and that is that they will calculate your heat load by room, and they will share that with you. So if you go through that program, you can then share that heat load calculation with all the other contractors and tell them, I want equipment that meets the needs of this heat load. Just in closing, we want to say that we have lots of events like this, and there are many coming up. All sorts of wonderful things in the offing. And we are a nonprofit. We welcome your donations to support our programs and our advocacy work. And we are conducting a survey of our program participants to find out who is in the room with us and how can we reach the broadest possible number of people and demographic types of people in our region. So we encourage you to fill out this survey, and you'll get a chance to win one of 5 $50 gift cards if you do complete the survey. So thank you for your participation in that. And here is my contact information, and I'll have Amanda take over leading the question and answer session.
Great. Thanks so much, Loie. We got a lot of great questions throughout the presentation, some of which I think you answered during the presentation, but we can definitely reiterate some answers. Just a reminder, if you do have questions, please enter them into the Q&A chat. That is what we will be using to answer questions today. So going to our questions we have so far, someone asked, they said that their oil burner heats the whole house, and they're asking if a ductless air source heat pump would only heat a small area. I think that depends on their system design and setup, right, Loie?
Exactly. Yep. You can choose to completely replace that oil burner, or you could say we're going to use that oil burner only between 30 degrees and, negative 30, whatever it is. But we're going to use the heat pump for every time above 30 degrees. Or you can say, um, the oil burner is great and it's going to be our major heat, but we're going to recognize that, say, the great room needs more heat, or some space needs more heat, and we're going to put a ductless mini split in that space. Or you could say it needs more air conditioning, and we're going to use a ductless air source heat pump primarily for air conditioning, but we know we'll be able to use it, say, in September and October when we just need a little bit of heat. Um, but again, down to, um, you know, 50 degrees or 40 degrees or whatever it is. So there are many varieties you can choose.
Great. Thanks for that answer, Loie. We also have a question about what are the additional costs to replace a tankless hot water system, which often comes along with oil heating?
By a tankless, because you're saying it comes along with oil heating, I'm assuming what you mean is what we call an indirect hot water system, where you have your boiler and you have a pipe going from the boiler to a water tank, and there's a constant flow there where you're basically getting free hot water during the winter from your oil burner because your burner's firing all the time, and it's just sharing that heat with the water tank. That indirect system is one of the most efficient, and if you are going to replace your oil burner, you can actually keep it uh, as the hot water system if you want to do that, if it's still functioning, etc. Um, you can disconnect the thermostat to the boiler, but still have basically a thermostat on the hot water tank that fires it up for that purpose. It's not a common choice, but you can do that. Generally speaking, you want to replace that, both the boiler and the tank next to it, with a heat pump for your space heating and a heat pump for your water heating. It would no longer be integrated.
Great. And will heat pumps restart automatically after an electricity outage?
Good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'm assuming that they would, but um, and I'm pretty sure that mine did. I lived with a heat pump for more than 10 years and never remember it being a problem. So I'm sure it does. Yeah.
Awesome. And do these incentives and loans apply to new construction ADUs being added to an old house?
Um, that's a good question. I'm pretty sure that these apply to both ADUs and new construction. I'm more confident on the ADUs than the new construction, but Mass Save has a separate program called Major Renovations and New Construction, and it's possible that there's a different um, incentive structure for those. So check the Mass Save website, search for major renovations and new construction, and you'll be able to get the information there. It would be under residential and then new construction and major renovations.
Great. We're also getting some questions about where people can go to get the home energy assessment. That is through Mass Save, correct?
Well, you can either call Mass Save directly, or you can go to one of the contractors listed on the Mass Save website. So if you use Find a Contractor on the Mass Save website, you'll see three categories of contractors that they have certified. One is the insulation. You don't want to use those people. One is the heat pump. And what you want to do is the home performance contractors, HPC. That's the type of contractor who are paid by Mass Save to come to your home to do what is to you a free home visit to do the assessment. And they're the people who take down all the data that's necessary for Mass Save to be able to calculate which incentives you would qualify for.
Great.
And that's often a little quicker process, calling the home performance contractor themselves. You do need to be aware that they oftentimes have other services and they may try to upsell you on their services. But if they recommend insulation, that cost, the insulation and air sealing cost, is fixed by, controlled by Mass Save. So you can call any home performance contractor and get the same cost and generally the same quality of insulation and air sealing.
Great. And if someone has a partial heat pump on the second floor, but then they still have their gas furnace heating their first floor, would they qualify for a rebate if they decided to replace their gas furnace with a heat pump?
I believe you would. It would be under the partial program, though, under the partial tier, not the whole home tier, I believe.
And we're getting a few specific design questions. Looks like someone has two bedrooms that are right on top of each other on the first and second floor. And they're asking if the one condenser can feed both of those rooms.
Definitely. No problem. And each would have their own thermostat, but they would both be, firing up the condenser when they needed to draw energy.
Great. Another person is saying that they have hot water heat from an oil system and no basement. Since they don't have a space for a water heater, would the whole home heat pump system make sense for them?
Interesting question. Yes, definitely you can do that. You might want to use a split heat pump water heater in that instance, where your tank could be in a small space, but your condenser would be outside, and that would solve that problem.
Great. Let's see. It looks like someone got a quote from one vendor who performed an assessment, but they would like to go through a different vendor. They're not getting a response from the vendor that did the assessment. Do they need to get a new assessment in order to install a heat pump?
No, that original assessment, if you're talking about a home energy assessment, that supplies Mass Save with the data. That's kind of your base setting for the Mass Save program to be able to calculate your rebates, and you can get quotes, heat pump quotes from any other Mass Save approved vendor. It does have to be one, they do have to be listed on that heat pump installer network list in order to have you qualify for the rebate. But yeah, you can get quotes from anybody, and you don't need to get a new assessment from each heat pump vendor. The assessment is done once.
Great. I think this is more of a design question. Someone is asking, how do you handle if you want to close your door, but the heat pump is outside in the main room? I think the answer would be you would want to design the system so that you would also have a head in your bedroom so that you could still get heat through that and close your door and have another head in the main living area, right?
Generally speaking, if your sole source of heat is a heat pump, then every room where you generally will be closing the door will have its own head, or will have a duct connecting it to a shared head. So that bedroom situation perhaps could just be have a mini duct from a shared head, a shared air handler. But generally speaking, yeah, each room where the door is closed needs its own head. Now, that said, there are plenty of places that have small bedrooms. Like in my house, there's a small bedroom on the second floor that's above an entryway where there's no heat, and it's the tail end of a hydronic baseboard. So the water in that baseboard is not very hot by the time it gets around to that small bedroom that's on a corner that's above an unheated space. So that small bedroom is always cold, and we just don't worry about it. There's no water running through those walls. We have extra quilts for the bed that's in there, and you know, if we were to switch to heat pumps, would we put a heat pump in there? I'm not so sure we would. You know, um, it depends on, I guess, how hot you want the room to be in winter.
That
It
makes
is a little
sense.
chilly to get out of the bed in that room in the morning in winter, but that's what bathrooms are for.
Great. All right. Well, we are 2 minutes over, so I think we will end there, but really appreciate all the great questions. And like I said in the beginning, be on the lookout for a follow-up email with the slides and the recording.
Yeah, and feel free to send me an email if you have more questions, but definitely do check out our website. And thanks so much for doing the survey. If you haven't had time yet to do the survey, you can take a picture of this QR code and fill it out if you would like to do that. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye bye.